It's my nerd world, and welcome to it. It's Positively Star Wars listener feedback. What? Positively Star Wars listener feedback? What is going on? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. You're getting 2 Star Wars shows for the price of none, because I offer them for free. Switching things up for the new year, I was actually inspired by the Star Wars show itself, which returned this week, which I'll talk about. But this show will be devoted exclusively to your listener feedback. So with that being said, let's not waste any more time.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
And welcome to My Nerd World. I'm your host, Jon Justice, for the first episode of Positively Star Wars listener feedback. So here's the deal. The shows had been getting long. I've been trying to taper them back, but I realize in doing the regular weekly Star Wars show that I've been doing, I hadn't been spending as much time with the listener feedback and your emails that I had hoped. I was kicking around the idea of perhaps being a little bit more selective in what emails I read and what emails I don't read, but there's so much good commentary that you're providing to this show every single week that I didn't want to do that. And I felt like I was rushing the shows. So the Star Wars show, the official Star Wars show on YouTube came back this week. And they made the announcement that the official Star Wars show is only going to take place once a month. I think they said on the last Wednesday of every month. The shows would be a little bit longer, but they were going to limit it to one a month. And that once a week, the Star Wars show would go and put out a Star Wars news this week on Thursday. So there will be a weekly Star Wars official show. Again, that'll come out every single Thursday. And then the Star Wars show, which will include interviews and stuff like that, will happen once a month. And that got me thinking that why don't I go ahead and split up the Positively Star Wars show and do one show dedicated just to your listener feedback, because I get so many great responses from you. And then the regular show will continue as normal without the listener feedback. So, Positively Star Wars listener feedback will be audio only for the time being. And then the regular full show will continue to be the audio version and also the video version that you can find on YouTube. So, that's the deal moving forward. So, in terms of times, the shows, potentially my plan is to get the Positively Star Wars listener feedback show out every Friday, and then the regular full show, news and commentary, to come out on Saturday. That may fluctuate a bit depending on my own personal schedule, but you can expect both shows to come out every single weekend at some point in time, via Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. So curious to see what you think. You can drop me an email, as always, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. The audio version will be available on YouTube as well, and like I said, the video version of the full show will still be up on YouTube. But this will provide, again, a great opportunity for me to spend more time with listener feedback and your comments without having to be too selective in which ones I choose. I won't feel as rushed, and then the regular full show, I can spend on, again, just news and commentary, and hopefully add a little bit more of the video element for the video portion of the show. So I figured now that January's in the rearview mirror, it's time to go and switch things up. One more note about my nerd world. I am also planning a couple of other things as well. I've brought back the Depeche Mode podcast on a weekly basis, so if you're a Depeche Mode fan, That'll be available. It's all going to be on the same feed. So as these shows come out, again, if there's a show you don't want to listen to, feel free to just delete it. I'm sure you will. But for the sake of the way that I'm producing the shows, they'll all be coming out on the same feed. Also, I'm planning on doing some breaking news, My Nerd World podcasts, devoted particularly and specifically to pop culture and beyond Depeche Mode. So when there's major movie news that I feel like discussing, I will be putting out a breaking news, a My Nerd World breaking news podcast, and there'll be a video version of that as well. So be sure to keep an eye on your feed. There's a lot of stuff coming down the road. I'm also planning on a special making of EMBARK Book 3, The Vanishing War. And I just sent out an email blast to everybody on the emailing list detailing everything that'll be coming up with My Nerd World. Basically, I'm gonna get busier when it comes to My Nerd World. I really like putting out this content, and I've adjusted my schedule so that I have time apart from my full-time job and working on my books to go and do this. And honestly, when it comes to doing two different versions of the Star Wars, Positively Star Wars show, it really is just recording two different. I'm taking one show and breaking it up into two, so it's not any extra work in that regard. All right, so with that being said, let's get to your listener feedback this week. Either leaving a comment on YouTube or emailing me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
And that would be you emailing me. First email comes from Patrick Stoll. Loved the beginning of this past week's show, John, and your defense of the ridiculous breakdowns of the sequel trilogy. I think the same stuff could be applied to the prequel trilogy, but again, a lot of fans either grew up with those films, so those are their OT movies, or with time, the same people who were criticizing them are now also criticizing the sequels for similar reasons. I have stopped listening to all other Star Wars podcasts and only listen to yours because many others seem to have forgotten why they originally did their podcasts, in my opinion. I love that you haven't, and I believe in this stance as well. So if you sit down to watch something, as you said, any movie for the most part can be pulled apart and criticized for issues. But if you were entertained by it and enjoyed yourself, that was the point. Take that and move on with your life, being happy about the enjoyment and the entertainment that you got. As always, love your show and your perspective. May the Force be with you. Thank you, Patrick. You've always been a great supporter. And I should probably mention at this point in time, I know it's going to be a little weird, but the listener feedback portion of the listener feedback podcast will be in response to your listener feedback either from this show or the main show. Okay, right? I guess that probably makes sense. So if you're expecting to hear your listener feedback from the regular show, then you're going to have to listen to this podcast. I hope that makes sense and I didn't make it too confusing. If I did, I can always go back and do it the other way. But for right now, I'm going to try this for a couple weeks and see how things shake out. All right, friend of the show, Miranda, writes this. For the past month or so, I've come to a point where I've decided to stop spending too much time complaining about the fandom and whatever comes out these days. Do I still get annoyed and tired? Sure. But in a time where rage and outrage and outcries and random fallouts online have become its own epidemic, one has come to the conclusion that if the argument is not directed at you, you don't have to weigh in or comment upon it. Boy, truer words, Miranda, may not have been spoken, because I feel exactly the same way. I cannot tell you how often I'm on Twitter and I see somebody make a comment about something and I try to go and write a response to try to not push back, but just offer a different perspective. And then I catch myself and go, nope, I am not going to do that. I love that you haven't, and I believe, oh, sorry, that was going back to Patrick's email, my bad. Or in other words, I've come to a point where it's better to leave people alone, let them rant, let them talk. Civil debates, accepted, but moaning and being presumptuous, a presumptuous know-it-all or a bully, shut the door on them just like Rey did at the end of The Last Jedi. Other than that, I'll always be here for the fandom. Most of them, anyway. Boy, Miranda, siblings from another mother or something. And then she wrote another email, and it said this. You know what? I'm going to do something completely different for no reason. And this is the quote. Imagination is the most marvelous, miraculous, inconceivably powerful force in the world has ever known. Great thoughts, Miranda. As always, I appreciate it. All right, Brian Martin writes this, short and sweet. What are your thoughts on Colin Trevorrow's script for Episode 9, Duel of the Fates? How do you feel it compares to The Rise of Skywalker? That's an interesting question. And thank you for that. I've seen The Rise of Skywalker now 10 times. I love this movie. I really, really do. I love it for different reasons than I love The Last Jedi. I like it more than I do The Force Awakens. I love the sequel trilogy. There is, on this last viewing of The Rise of Skywalker, I realized that there is the sense of adventure, and the word that pops into my head is playfulness, but I don't think that's completely right. But just this sense of adventure and a different type of storytelling than we're used to seeing in Star Wars, and a tone and a finale that is very much on par with Return of the Jedi. And I like that about it. Star Wars isn't Return of the King. It isn't Lord of the Rings, right? Star Wars isn't The Hunger Games. Star Wars is Star Wars. And I feel that the ending of The Rise of Skywalker is perfect the way that it is. I know a lot of people don't. Having gone through Colin Trevorrow's script for Episode 9, Duel of the Fates, how do I feel it compares to The Rise of Skywalker? What are my thoughts on it? That's tough. I mentioned this on last week's show because I love what The Rise of Skywalker gave us, and there are so many elements of The Rise of Skywalker that I would be bummed if I didn't see. Then I obviously like The Rise of Skywalker more than what Colin Trevorrow put together. Now, that being said, apart from the major story beats for the protagonists, right, for the dual protagonists of Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, and Rey in Colin Trevorrow's script, I don't particularly like what he did with them. I love some of the artwork and the imagery, but it's Star Wars, right? How can you not like it? And that's the tough thing for me when I'm reading the script of a movie that's never going to get made. It's still Star Wars, so I'm still drawn to it because it is Star Wars. It's like almost reading a book, a different version of a book. I didn't like a lot of the story elements in it, but I like a lot of what the story did. Some of the ideas about going back to Coruscant, some of the action sequences and the missions that they were going to be sent on, I think would have been really cool. I'd love to see Colin Trevorrow's script retooled into something else. I think that it had the potential to be a really interesting Star Wars movie, just not a good Episode 9. It really did feel like, to me, what he did with Jurassic World. And I liked Jurassic World quite a bit. I like how it... And I know people are going to disagree with that. A lot of people don't like Jurassic World. But I really enjoyed that film. And it was that film that had me really excited at the time, for what Colin Trevorrow could potentially do. Now, that being said, I'm very happy that J.J. Abrams did Episode 9. And this movie that Colin Trevorrow did was not the version that we got. If there never was a J.J. Abrams Episode 9 Rise of Skywalker, and we did get Duel of the Fates, I'm sure that I would have liked it. I'm sure I would have enjoyed it as a Star Wars movie. But if we're putting them side by side, it's tough to go and say that I would have liked one over the other, because I really do love what J.J. Abrams did with The Rise of Skywalker. And the more I watch it, the more I pull from it, and it feels like the most Star Wars film of the sequel trilogy to me. Even more so than The Force Awakens, even though The Force Awakens is derivative of, what we saw in the original trilogy. The music in The Rise of Skywalker is just fantastic, and there's some moments in The Rise of Skywalker, the visual, the music, the tone is on par with stuff that I love in The Empire Strikes Back. So I hope that answers your question. I don't like the name, by the way. I do not like the title Duel of the Fates. I don't like the idea of pulling from such an iconic track such as that. Some of that imagery, man, was rad. I mean, seeing Rey dressed like Luke was pretty darn cool. But concept art to me is always really cool. So again, I hope that answered your question. All right, Tim Liu writes this. Loving the positive vibes. I've been a fan of Star Wars since I was 7, when I saw the movie for the first time. It felt like an amazing ride. I'm now 50, and The Rise of Skywalker gave me all the feels and thrills that watching A New Hope gave me back in the day. Keep up the good work, mate. That's cool. I wasn't even planning on doing that. I don't pre-read these. I did once. I think last episode I did. I went through and highlighted like I do stories for my radio show. But I don't like to do that. I like to get these fresh because I feel like it's you talking to me. I feel like if I'm reading it for the first time when I'm doing it on the show, I feel like we're actually having a conversation. So it's really awesome that you had the same thrills, watching The Rise of Skywalker as you did A New Hope. That's fantastic. All right, Silver Maiden 42240 says this. I guess you can call me obsessed. All right. I was going to call you Silver Maiden, but I can call you obsessed. That's a bad dad joke, huh? Sorry. I don't watch these movies to have a fun ride. Interesting. I totally understand that's why some people love these movies, but that's not me. I get involved with the stories. I do both, but that's cool. I dig into the universe. I want to know everything about the canon. I want it all to fit. I do the same thing with Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Trek, etc. It's the characters and the world building that I come for. I want to know how someone's great-grandma fits into the story. That's just me. But I don't think that's a bad thing. No way, it's not a bad thing, not at all. It's my escape. Not that my life is just terrible, but we all need that escape sometimes, and that's how I do it. I think the fans that are upset are the ones like me. Although I'm learning to figure out ways that I can be okay with this movie, it did mess up my escape because I felt like it just didn't fit to the rest of the canon. Okay. And it didn't send the message of hope that I was wanting and really needing in my Star Wars. I get that, but again, I'm gonna pop in here real quick and just say, this comes back to the subjectivity of it. Because for me it did. And I've mentioned this before on the Positively Star Wars show, my thoughts about the passing of spoiler alert, Ben Solo and that moment at the end. And and I know there's going to be a lot of people, I know you're going to disagree with me, and that's totally okay, right? And that's totally okay if you feel differently. But that moment at the end, when Ben Solo brings Rey back, and they had that exchange and that kiss, it's becoming one of my favorite moments. I mean, that moment of the two of them is right up there with the finger touching loving from The Last Jedi for me. And it's such the progression of all three films leading to that moment. My heart goes out to Ben Solo in that moment when Rey decides to lean in and have this intimate moment with this man. It guts me in the best possible way. It's tragic, right? And that's sometimes life is tragic. But yeah, I love that for both of them. And I love that Ben was able to go and transform into the Force. Mourn them, do not. Miss them, do not. All right, back to Silver Maiden. I'm sorry, obsessed. Just kidding. I truly do love that many people enjoyed this movie, and I don't agree with anyone who wants to take that joy away. I do hope that people who love the movie can understand, though. Of course, for those of us that that like to completely escape into these worlds, we can literally feel like we've lost people we love or go into it mourning the loss of the story. Loss of continuity. Psychologically, our brains react the same way if these things are happening to us. When something doesn't feel right, we can really throw a person's whole world out of balance. I'd love for your listeners to just hear that even if they don't understand it, these are real feelings. It doesn't ever excuse nastiness. But these desperate attempts to fix this movie are people's way of dealing with their means of escaping being pulled out from under them. Thanks for the show, John. I do still love to listen, even though I disagree with some things about The Rise of Skywalker. That's totally fine, and I get that. And again, it bums me out that people didn't like it, and we can obviously agree to disagree. I immerse myself in these worlds as well. But we all deal with the fandoms in our own personal way, right? And it's not right for any of us to tell another person that they're wrong for feeling a particular way, regardless of how you feel about the movie. All right, Dale said this, and there's some timestamps on here, so I might miss some context, but you spoke about watching these movies for the first time for your enjoyment and the subsequent times with scrutiny for reviewing and reporting or something to that effect. I'd love to have some Q&A. What are some of the major things you hear, and what's your best answer? Question: why isn't Rey sad that Ben or Luke or Han died? Answer: there is no emotion, there is peace. Jedi code, meaning that I could, the meaning that I could find for this. Jedi are not immune nor denied emotional feelings. Unless a Jedi can confront his thoughts, feelings, he will never achieve peace. Emotions are not to be overcome or denied, but rather understood. Hell, that answers over half the questions that the fandom has. When you watch Star Wars through the eyes of a critic, you see things to criticize. When you watch what you love through the eyes of a child, right, removing expectation with your heart, you find so much more love. There is an ad that I run on Twitter to promote my EMBARK books, and it's a quote that I grabbed. I'm trying to find it right now. I have a list in notes here of it. There is very little grown-up in a child, but there is a child in every grown-up. The grown-up in me writes these stories for the child inside all of us. So that's what you're speaking to right there, and I tend to agree. Let me go back to this question, though. Why isn't Rey sad that Ben or Luke or Han died? I disagree with that. She was obviously sad in The Force Awakens when Han died. I mean, she screamed, she yelled, right? When Luke passed away, the explanation is given in The Last Jedi. Okay? I mean, I like your explanation, Dale. I'm just giving you my thoughts on it. Again, it's all subjective. In The Last Jedi, she says, Luke's gone, but it wasn't sad. It was peace and purpose. And then when Ben passed away, I take that shot of that camera shot looking at her face as sadness. It's not the same kind of sadness that we saw at the end of The Force Awakens after Finn was struck down by Kylo Ren, right? But it was a sadness of, he's gone. But I also see a level of understanding in her eyes. She's sad that he's gone, but there's also an understanding that he's transformed into the Force. And the way that I perceive that is, Rey also understands that Ben came back and was saved, but paid the price for bringing her back with his own life. And that all of that is in her face. Look, Rey is my favorite Jedi, and Rey is, at the moment, my favorite Star Wars character ever. I adore her in The Rise of Skywalker. I really, really do. I love what JJ did with that character. She comes off as such a strong, compassionate, joyful woman in that movie in so many different levels. Every time she's on screen, which is the majority of the film, it's just magical to me. I loved her in the other films, but her progression. I do know. I do like her character in The Rise of Skywalker more than her character in The Last Jedi. And again, these things can move, but at the moment, if you're asking me which Rey from which movie do you enjoy watching the most, I'm gonna go with Rey from The Rise of Skywalker. There's just so many great moments, just quiet, tender moments that she has in the film. And I mentioned it on last week's show, but that moment when she meets the Aki girl on Pisana, and she asks, what are her names? She's like, I'm just Rey. And she smiles with her mouth closed, and she shows her dimples. I just, that moment is pure magic to me. The way it's captured, the way that she delivers that expression on her face, it's just truly amazing. All right, friend of the show, you're all friends of the show, but I'm giving you the title anyways. Jen G says this: social media, especially Twitter, is a cesspool. I tend to agree. My fave clickbait this past week was Mike Zero with Disney is bringing Ben Solo back. It did not. I did not click on it, but it made me laugh. I have no idea what he actually said, but honestly, if it wasn't talked about on Twitter at all, I knew it wasn't what people would think it is. On a side note, Lost Stars is great, and I would love to see it as a movie. Great podcast. Thank you, Chen G. As always, I appreciate it. All right. He-Man. I think it's the first time I've heard from He-Man. He-Man says this. Marvel cancels shows left and right. Not a peep. Lucasfilm changes the schedule slightly on a Star Wars show. OMG, Disney continues to ruin Star Wars. OMG, Disney can't plan Star Wars to save its life. OMG, Disney has no idea how to handle Star Wars. I know! It's insane! I don't get it. I brought back my Depeche Mode podcast. For those, if you're not familiar, sort of the list of important things in my life. God, my family, my wife, my children, my job, and then the things that fill my life with joy. It's NASCAR, it's Star Wars, and it's Depeche Mode, in no particular order, right? NASCAR season's coming back, so I'm excited about that. But I brought back my Depeche Mode podcast. And I brought back my Depeche Mode podcast because the record label for Depeche Mode reached out to me on Twitter and asked me to record a video telling my story of how what Depeche Mode means to me. And they posted it on their Twitter feed, and it was rad. But I had all these Depeche Mode fans that reached out, and they were so gracious and great. And I realized that there's no divisions in the Depeche Mode fandom. If you don't like a Depeche Mode song, it's cool, man. There's another Depeche Mode song. And it's just so refreshing to hear, right? I'm doing a better job when it comes to social media. I'm muting a lot more people. I'm not, like I said before, I'm doing my best not to respond to things that I see and I kind of go, I don't agree with that, right? I'm doing better because I want to keep it positive. But you're right, man. Look, a really good example of what He-Man just wrote was... Doctor Strange. They got a new director for that. Something happened. They got a new director for the next Doctor Strange movie. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. But holy cow. I get it because Star Wars is so beloved, but man alive. All right. One more. Across the Stars writes this. I was listening to this discussion about Freud and Jung, and it was about whether an entire society could be as neurotic as an individual. And I think we can see now that it can. When people can't even disagree on a movie without thinking the other is evil incarnate. I think we're there, LOL. The absolute idiocy I see on Twitter is a prime example. I love your positivity, John. You're a blessing to this fandom. Thank you, Across the Stars. I really do appreciate that. All right, so I want to give you... That's it for the listener feedback this week. There wasn't a ton. Okay. Email me, TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. You can leave a comment up on YouTube as well. I won't go into the changes again, but you can expect the full show to come out within the next day or so, depending on when you are when you're listening to this. As a bit of a preview for the big show this week, this is what I have on tap for discussion. We're going to get into the Clone Wars trailer. Clone Wars coming back here in a couple weeks. I did not talk about it on last week's show, so we'll definitely get into that. The Resistance finale. I'll give you my thoughts on the Resistance finale. You might be surprised at my response. Okay? I'm going to be a little bit objective. Actually, there's going to be a lot of objectivity on the show this week. We are also going to, again, talk a little bit more about Rey in The Rise of Skywalker. All right? The big topic, topic number one on the show, is going to be this. So prepare yourself. A topic on the show this weekend is going to be, for the future of Star Wars, why Disney and Lucasfilm have to ignore the fans. I'll share my opinion on the show. I'm actually working on an article that I'm hoping to get published in a couple of different places. But I have come to the conclusion that as Disney and Lucasfilm continue to create Star Wars content, and I'll explain myself, that they need to go and ignore the fans, the fans out there, the most vocal fans. That's not to say you don't look at box office returns, right? That's of course important. That's not to say you don't pay attention to what the fans are saying, but that is to say that for the sake of Star Wars and the creative process, I'm of the opinion that it needs to be left in the hands of the creators, and you can't go and please everybody, right? And I'm using this idea of George Lucas when he made the original trilogy and why that original trilogy was so special. And it was partly special, in my opinion, because George Lucas was doing what George Lucas wanted to do. He wasn't doing what he thought the fans wanted to do. And there's a lot of fans out there right now that feel like they have a lot of power via hashtags. I'm going to provide some perspective on that power and lay out why it's not nearly as powerful as I think a lot of people believe. And that for the future of Star Wars, I really do hope that the content creators do not take to heart the majority of the campaigns that are out there demanding one thing or another. So that's going to be the core of the main show this week, which will be available on wherever you're listening to this show at, and also the video version up on YouTube as well. All right, email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Drop me a comment on YouTube if you want to respond to any of the listener feedback from Positively Star Wars listener feedback this week. Of course, when you hear the full show, you can email me there, and we'll share them on this show. Quick reminder, as always, if you want to support my Nerd World and what I am doing on a weekly basis, please go and pick yourself up a copy for you or a friend of my EMBARK science fiction space opera series if you're a reader. If you're not, but you know somebody, you got a friend or a family member who likes sci-fi, go to Amazon.com, search for Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK. You can pick up book 1. You can also pick up EMBARK Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, and The Vanishing War is coming out very, very soon, so get caught up now while you can. This is set in the future. This is Firefly meets Fast and Furious, Star Wars, and Ready Player One. These are fun adventures suitable for all ages. Set in the future where air and space flight culture has replaced car culture. The planet is at risk. Taftgardia is in love. The girl he's in love with comes upon a mysterious message from her scientist father, which thrusts them into the middle of humanity's survival as they escape to the stars. I hope you'll go and pick yourself up a copy. It would mean the world to me. If you've read the books and you enjoy them, please go and leave a positive review on Amazon.com. But again, if you want to support the show, I hope you'll pick up a copy of the ebook, the paperback, or the audiobook, and a purchase of the ebook, which is only $2.99. That's a bargain for both books. $2.99. The purchase of the ebook will get you a huge discount on the audiobook that is produced and narrated by me. All right, we'll be back next week with another Positively Star Wars listener feedback show. And keep an eye on your feed for the full Positively Star Wars show coming out this weekend.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.